Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Citizen Bear. This is a podcast that looks at the many topics and ideas in my book, The Demonstrative Citizen, The Revelation of Two Dragons. And while, the book is a good yarn and a great read, I think, I'm proud of it, but you don't have to read it. That's not the purpose of the podcast. We want to discuss some of these ideals and some of the topics and bring them out into modern society and how they relate to our world today and how the things that are going on. So let's begin. First, I have to tell you, I had really planned to do a different topic today. I wanted to talk about faith as part of citizenship, the journey of faith and citizenship as it's described in the book, and how important it is to who we are and how we not only make choices, but how we act upon those choices. And there's a strong correlation between faith and, free society that I think we really ought to delve into a little bit. It really is an important part. I think there was a time in our society that was a given. People looked at that and they really wanted, and today I think it's become a little shattered, a little broken apart. We don't see it the same way, and that's really a terrible tragedy, both for faith and for citizenship. And how we go about our citizenship. Maybe, as things get a little broken, we tend to lose sight. But I want to take a second, too, because I've talked in the past about language being important. I think it's a great breaking point. And I'm kind of thinking about making this a theme within all of the podcasts about how important language is and just interject one topic. And I saw something out there on the television the other day during some conference or something like that, and young man stood up and he was merely pushing some of the, I would call them neo-Marxist views on things, but you take it as you like it. And he was very aggressive on his conversation, and he referred to some of the topics that were being put out as being Western values. We don't agree with the Western values. Okay, well, that's your prerogative, but I think that language seems to me to be something that people are parroting, not really understanding. And so if you're going to tell me that you don't like Western values, could you tell me what values you do like? Because I don't know. What are the values? Do you really want to live in communist China? I mean, is that what you're looking for? Because I think you're going to find that that's not such a value-based system anymore as we come to understand values. It's an authoritarian government, and you're going to just do what you're told. I mean, that's the value system, right? I mean, they can have certain values and go about their day, but, if people disagree with the government, we just saw there where their group of a Muslim sect was taken, put in boxcars, literally, in 2020 or whatever, right? In 2025, whatever. They put in boxcars and sent to a camp, and I'm not sure that many of them survived today. I mean, I don't know if that's the value system you're shooting for, but it ain't mine. So I think before we say we don't like Western values and start parroting those words out there, I think language matters, and I think the thought behind that language matters. And maybe you ought to be able to define just what values you do like. And you might be shocked to find out that the values you do like are really Western values. But that aside, the topic for today, like I said, I wanted to do faith, and that'll be next week. That's going to be the next time we get together. But today I want to talk about gun control. This is something that it was kind of incorporated in the last couple of podcasts, or a couple of them back a little bit, the first and second, when we talked about militia, but in the Second Amendment a little bit. But I want to take this from a very different perspective. And the reason I put this forward this time, because it just seemed to be so in my face out there. There seems to be this large push again for gun control, and almost on every front, on every topic. And I really don't see this as just a gun control issue. I see this now as a rights issue in our country and a constitutional issue in our country. And I see it as an assault on all of those rights. And I kind of want to talk about this, but the Second Amendment particularly I want to talk about in this, because I think it does get treated poorly, and I don't think we always give it the due it deserves. And I think that for that reason, I think people who look to overturn our society, and I'll use the term neo-Marxist in our society because I think it's pretty accurate, really want, really use the Second Amendment as a gateway to other rights and to overturn some things by being aggressive against it. And it's an easier, maybe what you might call low-hanging fruit to some people. I do understand, though, out there are people who don't like guns. And there are people who don't want to do it. And you have a right not to own a gun, and you have a right not to do those things. That's fine. And I understand you have a right to have an opinion on that. And that's good. That's okay. There are people who have been harmed, and that's okay to really want to bring change. But I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's as simple as just sitting there regulating firearms and impeding the Second Amendment. It's really more of a larger social issue that we need to address. And I think it's a very important social issue that we need to address within our society. And it is just a symptom of some of the problems that we've had, a symptom of a society that has been desperately degraded by bad politics and bad leadership over decades. I think moving on, I want to kind of get into the topic here a little bit. First of all, the Second Amendment is an individual right. Let's just get that off the table. That has been upheld, has been upheld time and time again. It has been out there and understood as an individual right. There's just no question about that. And I think we want to take that, and there's also writings in the Federalist Papers and other things, and I think we want to kind of just, let's not try to muddy the waters or allow others to muddy the waters. The right to keep and bear arms is an individual right. And our founding fathers very, very clearly wanted a heavily armed population. It is written in the Federalist Papers. Frankly, they put the Second Amendment in there. It's for a reason. We also shouldn't allow people to try to muddy the waters with the militia idea. I think that was one of the reasons to start with the militia, because the idea of the militia is the body of the American people. It is a body of individuals who come together for common cause, other than our regular military or the National Guard. It is the body of the American people who can effectuate good or effectuate things as an asymmetric, unregulated, unorganized force. I think also, we also discussed US 10, and we looked at some of the other factual things about the militia and individuals joining together. So I think we can kind of I think if you've watched those episodes, you can kind of tie them together. We have to remember that in this country, in the Revolutionary War, taxation without representation, and many other grievances of our founding fathers certainly precipitated, distrust and frustration with the British government. But most of our founding fathers were proud British citizens. When that began, when the Declaration of Independence started coming out, when we started actually starting to state our grievances to the king and to the British government, is when the British came for our guns. And in Williamsburg, they actually got into one of the storehouses, and they actually left with the guns. And they had a fairly successful opportunity with that. In Massachusetts, that didn't happen. That was the famous Paul Revere. One my land, two my sea, They had Paul Revere's Great Ride, that the British were coming. The British left Boston in force to obtain the weapons from the militia, from the individuals out there. They were going to disarm the population. That is when British soldiers fired on their citizens, on American citizens, on colonists, and colonists fired on British soldiers, essentially their government. That is when we started fighting. That is when the shooting started over the right to these people to keep and bear arms. And you could say that there were reasons because there were hostilities and they were pushing to, for certain rights and certain independence. But the fact of the matter is, the American Revolution, the actual revolution, started with the right to keep and bear arms and being disarmed. We discussed, I lost my place here. Sorry. These are kind of important topics within the book. And I think that one of the things I want to carry through is that when we look at this, this is going on in a more modern story where we have an enemy force in our country and people rise up to fight back. Our main military is dragged into a world war, and they are dispersed around the world, and there's very little help left at home. And these militias form up and kind of get very aggressive about defending their home, their rights from this force. And they create something of a fight in this country between people who want to disarm the militias and people who want to support them. And it becomes a back and forth between the people and this government. And eventually the government really, the military and the main government, the body of the American people, fall in behind the militias with good reason. But there are those who really wish to do it, and there are all kinds of factors behind it, including a certain amount of corruption. So that happens within the book, and they have to fight not only a foreign enemy, but they have to fight a domestic enemy to keep their ability to fight back. And it proves to be a major factor, a decisive factor, not just in winning the battle in the homeland, but also winning the global conflict. I wanted to say all this just because I wanted to have a little background and a little history in this, and I kind of wanted to frame some of that as a foundation for what I really want to talk about. You know, for a long time, the Second Amendment has been under assault, and not just that gun control, because in the 1930s we started to see gun control coming into play in our country, whether you agree with it or not. But in the last so many decades, it has truly, truly come under assault. And almost to a point that I no longer believe that it's really just totally about the Second Amendment, but really about changing our society and changing and undermining the entire Constitution, or at least the Bill of Rights. And we ought to take some pause on that. The Constitution of the United States can be amended, and there's a couple of ways, but the big way that we all look at is through, some people have talked about the other, which is a convention of the states, but the big way to change the Constitution is through ratification. And Congress puts out a bill, they put it out for ratification, and 2/3 of the state within a designated period of time has to ratify it. If you can't ratify that change, then the new amendment doesn't go into place. You don't get to remove, you don't get to negate an amendment, and you don't get to add an amendment if you can't ratify it. That is really how we change the Constitution. Now, some people will argue that with the Supreme Court, and we do argue that there are sometimes limitations and boundaries within certain rights, and that's understandable, freedom of speech and other things. We don't want, your rights tend to come to a screeching halt when they truly harm other people, right? Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We're seeing some of that right now in some of our cities again, and I refer back to the Marxist kind of movement. If you want to protest, I totally support that, and I think it should be protected. If you want your voice heard, you want to turn out en masse. It doesn't have to be what I agree with or my thought process on any given topic. It's your right, and you should put your voice out there. But when you start harming other people, looting stores, burning things, burning down buildings, you change from really being a protest or a movement on getting speaking openly to your government and to your fellow citizens. You become what would be the right word, an insurrection or whatever you want to call it, a riot. You become a riot. And unfortunately, what we're learning more and more is these are planned. Many of these people are planned as riots. There are people who are instigating these topics. I think when we allow, without ratification and as long as there are due bounds, if we allow ourselves to legislate to the point that we start to chip away at our rights, including the Second Amendment, we really change that mindset where and I think that's what's in process here is you can suddenly legislate away rights. And how far is that really allowed? I suppose the Supreme Court is left sorting that out. And I think the Supreme Court needs to slam the door on this hard, because it is not just about gun rights. It is about our overall rights. And then the legislature needs, and the this far left movement, this neo-Marxist movement within our country right now, that really does seek to do harm to our liberties and the way we do business, needs to start understanding that you just can't change. And those who want a more authoritarian government, or whatever it is, the New World Order, if you will, to change the Constitution, they just want to legislate it away, hollow it out, and turn it into a form of parchment promise, if you will. And that's not acceptable, and we need to slam the door on that and get back to the basements. I'm sorry, what part of shall not be infringed are we not getting our head around here? And recently we've had a ruling from the court upholding the right to keep and bear arms, and I think that, we talked about historical, in the ruling, historical precedent on this, and I think that's important, but I think it needs to go even further, because we're still, to some degree, this movement keeps chipping away at this right, and it keeps knocking it down. And the overall goal is ultimately to, right now, the cry is for the elimination of AR-15 platform weapons and similar type of firearms, and they use the term assault weapon, which is, I've handled firearms for over 50 years, and I know where it comes from, kinda, but it's like saying mid-sized car. I mean, it doesn't really mean anything, right? And everybody's definition can be a little different, but they're using this to try to get into eliminate that platform, which is also an assault on our ability, on the American militia and other things, the body of the American people. But it also allows them a stepping stone into the idea that once they're gone, the next attack will be on all semi-automatic weapons. And eventually, you're going to be way down the line here. You're going to get rid of lever actions and all kinds of guns. And I think this is the way this movement just keeps chipping away. And we have to really consider the bigger precedent here. If you can start eliminating the semi-automatic guns, or the AR-15 platform, which is probably the most widely popular firearms in America today, I think that you're going to find I think you're going to find they're going to start introducing this to new platforms, new constitutional issues. So what will be next? We will start judging your freedom of speech based on who likes it and that kind of thing. I mean, are we going to start driving down the soapbox in our country, whittling it down till you're right on the ground and it doesn't exist anymore? Are we going to be able to say that a mosque or church, a temple, a synagogue has to be closed, the people need to be taken away, or they're not allowed to worship anymore with freedom of religion, because we need to chip that down a little bit. Maybe there's some danger. We don't agree with the thinking. Who doesn't agree? These are mainstream, these are large faiths within the world and our society. Are we going to, because of global issues with Palestine, are we going to not allow mosques now, or synagogues in places? I mean, this kind of thinking, well, we took away the AR-15 because we thought it was dangerous and we didn't like it in society, so why can't we get rid of a synagogue? Don't laugh. They're working on it. And I think it's a real legal and constitutional question, is if you allow people to continue to chip away at the Second Amendment as a gateway into the overall Bill of Rights and the Constitution, how many other rights are we going to have chipped away at? How long will this precedent go? How long until the courts start just appeasing an aggressive minority that wants to attack this? We have to keep in mind that there have been attempts at constitutional amendment on the Second Amendment, and they have all failed wretchedly. The American people don't want it. The body of the American people, the majority of the American people, do not support any of these measures. And we should not allow people to just simply turn, because they can't get what they want, to turn to chipping away at your rights through legislative and legal action. And it's one reason I think at this point, because it has become a movement in our country to do this against the Second Amendment and many of our other rights, we need to slam this door closed, period. No more. And I really do believe that the Supreme Court needs to take a strong action on that. Not that people can't test law in the courts, and I'm sure there will be scenarios, but enough of this. Enough of these states coming out and just saying, well, we're not going to do that. We don't care, and you better care because it's the Constitution of the United States. And frankly, many of these states, the state of Pennsylvania, where I hail from, it is in our Constitution as well. There is a form of the Second Amendment in our Constitution. And yet we are out there working on it every single day to see what people want to do or where they want to go with this. How far can we push this down? What can we eliminate today? What's the next step? And it's a terrifying process. I think I've already talked on this a little bit, but I think we should be. And one of the other areas is gun registries. Look, gun control and gun registries throughout history, throughout our world, not just in the United States, has always been a precursor to authoritarianism. You can talk about public safety, and you can say that you want to have, for the good of the country, but we have to look at that in a larger context. Our founding fathers put the Second Amendment out there because they felt authoritarianism and totalitarianism in our society, taking over our government, was the greatest threat of all to public safety. And they fought a war over it. So I think that, and we have fought many wars over that very concept. We defeated fascism, and we've defeated authoritarian regimes all over the world, pushed them back in 2 great world wars, and wars even on our continent. And we have taken that at great cost in blood and treasure. And to allow it to start to raise its head here is a frightening, frightening concept. If we allow, or I should say that when we allow these things to happen, we should take them as a warning sign. When we are so aggressive at banning things like this and undermining our rights, and even particularly the Second Amendment, this has always been a formula. Gun registry has always led to confiscation, and confiscation has always led to a stepping stone for the authoritarian, because it takes resistance off the table, or at least meaningful resistance off the table, and people will conform. Again, I have to emphasize, the confiscation of arms has always been a precursor, and we're to a more authoritarian government and a depletion of our rights. And we're seeing this. We should be a little concerned about some of what's going on in the world. And I've talked about it before. In Germany today, you can't criticize the government online. That's what I understand, at least. Good Lord. That's not free society. And but they take away your guns. You don't have a lot of rights there. Now they're scrambling because they're threatened by Russia. They need to up their military spending, but they also, and I have to laugh. I want to interject this too, because I think it's really a profound thing of the difference of countries in Europe. And I think a lot of countries suffered terribly in World War II and under the fascists. And it's amazing how they learned their lessons and incorporated that into their mind, their thoughts as they've moved forward. And with Russia threatening Europe now, and a great concern about future engagements in NATO, we've seen countries double down and push harder for control and authoritarianism. Shockingly, countries like Germany and even Great Britain. And yet, we look at a country like Sweden, and Sweden has actually and they put out a book very similar to what they did in World War II on survival and how to prepare for a conflict and how to take care of your family and other things, stores that you should keep, including ammunition. And they've opened up, from what I understand, they've opened up gun ranges. And they've encouraged the people to keep firearms and more ammunition. They have opened them so that you can be proficient with those firearms. They're setting up for a fight. They're really prepared. They're getting their military ready, and they've got a very proud military. But I got to tell you, some great equipment. But I got to tell you, that's getting ready for the real thing. You know what I mean? They're telling their people, you may have to hold your own for a while. And that happened in World War II to many, many people, particularly up near Sweden. And this is something, and there's some great stories about that. And well, not great, they're horrible, but they're great to tell. We should learn from them. But that's a great example. So it's not all lost. I mean, there are people who really do understand this and want to put it out there in a moment of hard times. I want to kind of take a little step down on this and I want to look at kind of head towards a wrap up on some of this, but I think Thomas Paine would refer to this next segment as common sense. And I think it's an important point that we have to lead to. The Second Amendment is an important part of our society. It is ingrained in who we are. Not with everyone, but it is ingrained in who we are. And it shouldn't be misused either. I do agree with that. I preach safety, and I preach, as much as it is a right, it is one of our great responsibilities. And it should be managed with responsibility, and there is a price for not managing it with responsibility. I believe very wholeheartedly that the idea of gun control can only go so far in this country. And I will say to you that the AR platform and semi-automatic firearms is probably the hill that most Americans are probably willing to stand and plant their flag on. And they're willing to fight over. I think they realize that it's gone about as far as it's going to go, or they are willing to let it go. And if they let it go further, it will be lost. And maybe that's what some people want. I think we have to say, are we really going to allow ourselves to get into that type of confrontation? And are we going to allow ourselves to push back on our government? Are we going to be forced to push back on our government in such a time? Are we going to capitulate? And I have to tell you, and I wrote this is in the book, that capitulation to these things is nothing more than an expressed form of cowardice. When we capitulate to those who wish to take our rights and bully us and change our lives, and dictate terms to us, we are really taking a coward's way out. And I think there are a lot of people in this country, most of them actually, who really aren't interested in that. And I believe ultimately it will result in outright confrontation. I think we have to really consider the fact that are we talking, when we consider that concept and how far we're talking about it, talking about the invasiveness on our rights, are we really talking about gun control? Are we really talking about the arrogance of big government? And there is an arrogance in this, that we can do whatever we want. We're the government. We can legislate. Well, what do you mean you can legislate? You know, there are many people out there. I've listened to a couple of constitutional scholars who put out that they're not sure Congress has the right to write gun control legislation. The Founding Fathers were very specific about the powers of Congress, and gun control was not one of them, not at all. So I think that and I don't think the states have a right to supersede the American Constitution. I think we know that. So I think the ability of our government to just go so far on legislation is highly questionable. I think it's a power they usurped. They gave it to themselves. And that's kind of the definition of big government, where we go from express powers to those that we can just do whatever we want. And even further than that, we can act any way we want as a big government. Of course we can confiscate guns. And we've seen this. It's really horrific to me that in a free society, we have forces, police that come to the level of a paramilitary force, and there is a paramilitary force in the book that Bear and his friends are forced to engage and overcome, but that they engage citizens. And when you go after one person in their home, it's easy to be a thug. You can go after a guy and take his guns, right? You can go in there and, they shoot through the walls of the house. They kill you because you didn't come out fast enough. And they did do that recently in the last few years under the last administration to a veteran who was suffering from PTSD. What a terrible tragedy. No one's ever explained why the FBI was there, why they had jurisdiction in this matter, why they engaged him the way they did. I don't believe he was even armed. I mean, it's just frightening. And God bless his family. They're suing, but I think they owe the people, I think they owe the Congress an explanation as to what the hell they were doing. Because, that wasn't a gun control issue. I don't even know why they were there. But if you're going to start confiscating guns from people, you're going to have to go do this. And at some point, you're going to be able to bully a few people doing that, but people are going to figure out what you're doing. And then they're going to come in force, and you're going to have the fight of your life. No question about it. And you know, that's not helpful to our society, but it is the kind of discourse that I believe this neo-Marxist movement in our country wants. And we shouldn't take the bait. And no one should be their tool. Not law enforcement, not people in the streets. Think for yourself. Don't do that. I don't want to be too harsh on this, but it is an important topic. Because once again, for the first time in hundreds of years, we are talking about our government potentially firing on citizens to take their firearms. That's full circle, and that's a terrifying promise. And I think one thing that's important, that if it ever did come to that, and I certainly hope it wouldn't, that when people, it's easy to come to a guy's house and take his firearms and maybe even kill him in his home because you outnumber him. But when people figure that out and they push back, you should never forget, and I say this to those who would like to, have the arrogance to believe you can do whatever you want. We live here too. And these people, the gun owners of America, they know where you live too. Don't forget that. If you want to turn it out to a fight, you better be ready, because they know where you live too. And that's not a threat. You can take it any way you like it. But that's history. That's reality. And if you push too hard, that reality could come rearing out of the woods at you. 50 million strong, 100 million strong. That's ugly. That's very, very ugly. Unfortunately, I don't want to be cruel on that, but it is a lesson we have learned throughout the world time and time again. And if you believe that government's arrogance and big government can save you, think again and look at many who have pushed that issue. Tsar Nicholas was brought down with an unarmed civilian population. His family was shot in the woods. Not a good. So let's hope we never get to that point. But I think the greatest way we can get to that point is by the courts and by the people and our leaders getting back to our Constitution and preserving our rights, not allowing them to be chipped away or beaten down, and by using the proper method to go through and deal with that. I kind of want to get into a little conclusion here with this and kind of wrap up a couple of things here. I know that a lot of people out there will take this segment and the segment I just talked about it in this episode as being a little harsh, and I don't like to be like that, but it is a harsh topic. And if people put their feet down in the ground over this topic, as they have in the past, and they are on the high ground of having a constitutional right here, no matter how much you want to twist that language, I think you're going to have a hard time. And it could be very ugly and very harsh, and that is really what I would like to avoid, because I don't want that for my nation, and I don't want that for my children. Many people around the world, unlike a lot of our allies, in Europe, they're not far out of imperial rule. We have hundreds of years of rebellion, We were born of rebellion. So we come at this from a very different, and we have hundreds of years of the right to keep and bear arms. So I think it's a very different kind of mindset, and it always will be. The courts have to end this policy, and they have to stop they have to stop entertaining and appeasing this chipping away of our rights and the manipulation of our rights, because people can't get what they want, and they have to see it for what it is, an assault on the rights because they can't change the Constitution through the appropriate method. It also has to stop with our chief executives and our legislatures. This may be, you may think this is a winner with your political base or some other concept. This is a bad idea from top to bottom. You want to change the world, peacefully protest, bring your thoughts out there, discuss it, and you know what? Then we can work on it. But this is not the answer. And I will say to you, I suspect if we do talk about it and we really do get out there, we may find the thing we need to change are you, not the Constitution. Our leaders need to change, and their motivations. The career politician must come to an end. I think that is one of the greatest scourges that has ever come across our legislature, and I think it's how a lot of this has happened. We've allowed these people to push the ideas of other governments, other ideologies that are willing to pay. And I'm sorry, our rights are not for sale. This neo-Marxist movement has to be pulled out by the roots. I'm sorry, and that sounds like a terrible thing, but we need to kill it, and we need to pull it out by the roots and make sure that it never takes hold again. I believe greatly in a free society, and I have grown and lived and loved the benefits of America, and I want to see it thrive for my children and evolve into a better free society. And we do work at that, and that is possible. But only through our rights is that possible, not by the elimination of them. And we have to get this concept, because these people wish us harm. They wish your children harm. They want to change this society, and they want to turn it into something very, very different, whether it be this new world order or whatever you want to call it. That is a quantum leap backwards in our society. Sure, the world is coming together. Yes, there will be global initiatives. Yes, we're going to change the way we do business. Things evolve. I understand that. I've never doubted that, and as a matter of fact, I believe in it. But I don't believe in the way it's being done or the motivations on where it's going. And we should be very careful about that. Be careful what train you get on, because you might find yourself on the wrong destination. And that's something that Bear in the book really fights against. You know, the whys and wherefores matter. When the ballot box becomes unavailable to us, or it no longer works, when our system of government no longer serves the people or their constitutional rights, what is left to them is the cartridge box. And our founding fathers acted on that. They not only understood it, they acted on their beliefs. That is a harsh, harsh thing, what they did. But it created it created the greatest nation in the history of mankind, and an ideal that the world, beyond just some of the democracies of old Greece and other things, it created a constitutional republic like the world has never seen. And a great deal of good. There's been bad, but there has been a great deal of good, and we have worked hard and suffered to overcome those bad things, and we will have to continue that again. And there's more to do. But it is through our freedoms and our liberties that we find that path, that way forward, not through eliminating them. That is just the lie of the authoritarian. So let us make sure that as we go forward, that we address the motivations of these people, not just their issues, but the motivations of why they want to eliminate our rights and why they want to take away the Second Amendment. Because this is something that is not just imperative to our society as a constitutional right. It is a pillar of and a gateway to all of our other rights. And I think that if we allow that to happen, we could collapse the entire thing or turn it into or hollow it out so badly that it effectively doesn't exist, including your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the writ of habeas corpus, and so much more. Let us never get this society to a place where we must really, truly decide to walk in the footsteps of our forefathers. They gave us these tools so that we would never have to. And I hope that we are able to really do that. But that requires the strength and the character of individuals, always individuals. Like the individual right, we to keep and bear arms, we have the ability to come together in a form of militia, if you will, to join together to defend those rights, whether it be in the jury box, the ballot box, or the cartridge box, on the soapbox. We must come together to defend those rights. And that is the militia that is discussed in the second one, the asymmetric militia that we've talked about over here, of a militia of individuals. And I think that that concept plays through with all of our other ways to defend our rights, and we should use them. Of course we don't want to do the wrong thing. Of course we have to do this appropriate. Of course we work through the courts, and of course we do that. But we must never be afraid to stand our ground for what we truly believe in. And we must be very careful that we do not allow a tipping point that we can never recover from. So with that, I'm going to leave this. I wanted to address it. I think it's very important. In next episode, we get onto a little more cheery topic, and it's something that's a little closer to my heart, and that is of faith. And faith is a concept in the book that is really a golden thread that runs throughout the book, and I think it adds so much, and I really believe that it is such an important part of our citizenship, and it has a huge correlation to not just faith, but in how we practice our faith, but how we practice our citizenship within our constitutional republic. And I think you might be surprised on kind of some of my views on that, and might even interject a little bit of Dr. Seuss, because he's one of the great philosophers of our time. Anyone who can figure out a problem and explain the answer to a 6-year-old, it's pretty good in my book. But I think we're going to talk about this and try to make it a little more fun, and talk about our faith, and talk about it, that what in the book is referred to as the journey of faith and citizenship. So I hope this was a good episode. It's a little tough for me, but I really do feel it's very, very important with everything that's going on in our society. And I look forward to talking next time about faith. I'll see you then.